So selenium also is needed for the plant in some extent. Structural function of a cell has to occur properly, then the essential elements that are required are nothing but the biomolecules, which are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen. Any mineral absorbed by the plant is considered essential only if it helps the plant to grow properly and helps the plant to reproduce well. So that is one of the criteria. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to the session 1 of chapter 12, that is mineral nutrition. I am Dr. Divya, biology faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So this chapter describes about various minerals that are very essential for the growth of the plant and what are the criteria for these minerals and what are the different types of macronutrients and micronutrients. All this comes under this particular chapter. So in today's session, we shall discuss about the essential mineral elements and what are the criteria that has to be considered for the essentiality of that particular mineral element. So to begin with, we shall first study what are the methods to study the mineral requirements of plants. So how did scientists actually come to know that the minerals are needed for the plant? Some experiments have to be conducted for that, right? Among them, hydroponics is one such. So hydroponics was first introduced in 1860 by Julius von Sachs. So Julius von Sachs, he was a very famous or a prominent German botanist. So he was the first person in the year 1860 to have demonstrated that plants can be grown to maturity in a defined nutrient solution without the presence of soil. In 1860, he said that there is no need for the plants to grow in the soil. Without growing in the soil, whatever nutrients are there in the soil, if that same nutrients is added to water and made a solution, then the plants can be grown in that particular solution. And this technique of growing plants in a nutrient solution is known as hydroponics. So that is when we came to know what are the different types of minerals that are essential for the plants. So this is what Julius von Sachs, he was the first person to have introduced hydroponics in the year 1860. So talking about hydroponics, what exactly is done in hydroponics? So here a series of experiments. So after the introduction of hydroponics in 1860, a series of or different types of experiments were conducted in order to understand, that is, what type of nutrients are taken by the plant. So what they did was, scientists, they prepared different sorts of nutrient solution, and in each of these nutrient solution, they started dipping the roots of the plant and therefore observing the growth of the plant by removing some of the nutrients, by eliminating some of the nutrients, by adding some of the mineral elements or the nutrients. Therefore, clear picture as to which are the essential micronutrients and which are the macronutrients that are needed for the plant. So by this method, the essential elements were identified and also their deficiency symptoms were discovered. How could they do it? So what they did was, so here there is a typical setup we can see for, that is an experimental setup to understand what are the nutrients that are needed for the plants. So what they did was, they took a beaker or a pot-like structure. So they took a pot and in that pot they filled it with water. So in the water, what they did, they added all the nutrients. So one by one, say for example, they added iron and waited what might happen in the plant. So can the plant, is it enough only if iron is added to the plant? No, right? It may lead to the deficiency of other minerals. So what might happen? Next, they added iron, along with that they added magnesium. Likewise, they made different combinations of the minerals they added to the solution in order to understand which are the essential elements of the plant, and if that particular essential element is not provided to the plant, what type of deficiency symptoms will occur in that particular plant. Now in this, they took water. So into the water, now the water should become a nutrient solution. So for that, they placed a funnel, and into the funnel, they started adding all the nutrients. So all the nutrients all that it was added. Now it became the nutrients dissolved in the water and it became a nutrient solution. So now because it is growing in the water, now again aeration, proper aeration should occur. So they put a aerating tube into this particular pot and they placed a plant wherein the root part of the plant was dipping. So the root should be dipped in the solution. Root dipped in the solution. And wherever the gaps were there, that was filled, stuffed with cotton. After a few days, they started to absorb. So what type of minerals, what type of function it will do, what kind of growth will take place in the plant, and if one particular mineral is not added, what might occur in the plant, all that they started to study. This is one simple experimental setup, but again, the plants can be grown on a large scale. The best example is lettuce. So lettuce can be grown on a large scale by this hydroponic method, wherein instead of using a small pot, they use a tube-like structure. So if you can see here, this is a tube-like structure. In the tube-like structure, they will make holes, and to that, they would have inserted small pot-like pots. And these are circulated with water. And along with that, nutrient solution is also put here. So this nutrient solution is pumped. So there it will be connected to a tank which is consisting of the nutrient solution. It gets pumped and it will enter in through this, passing through each of these plants. Now each, as the nutrient solution is passing, each of the plants will make use of it. So here only one plant can be grown in this, but on a large scale, pipe method can be followed in order to grow a large number of plants. So this is how the plant roots were dipped into the water. As you can see, it is dipped into the nutrient solution, in particular, and the plants were made to grow. So like this, for an experimental setup and on a commercial basis also, the hydroponics was widely used. So it was popularized since 1860 itself. So by doing all these studies, the scientists came to know and they concluded what are the essential minerals for the plant's growth to happen properly. So moving on to hydroponics, therefore, has been successfully employed to produce different types of vegetables such as tomatoes. So you can see tomato grown through hydroponic technique, and also the seedless cucumber also through hydroponic techniques can be grown, and also lettuce also can be grown through hydroponic technique. And therefore, the only thing that has to be provided here continuously is the nutrient solution. No need of providing soil or anything. Only the nutrient solution must be adequately supplied, and proper aeration should be provided by adding a aerated tube or by placing a aerated tube. So much is there in one small plot itself, or inside a chamber itself or a room itself, you can grow the vegetables very, very easily. So hydroponics is one of the best suited method when the availability of land is scarce. So that time we can go in for the hydroponic method. So this is about hydroponic. So next, talking about the essential mineral elements. So now we came to know that it was through hydroponics that an actual picture of what are the essential mineral elements required by the plants was understood. So let us talk about the essential elements. So there are about more than 60 elements out of the 105. So it is said that there are 105 elements, but out of the 105, 60 elements have been discovered so far in different plants. And some plant species, apart from that, they also acquire some minerals which is not needed for the plant, such as selenium, and some of them acquire gold, while some plants which are growing near the nuclear active sites or the radioactive sites, they acquire the strontium. So strontium, gold, selenium, all that is not needed for the plant. But again, the plants absorb them. Why? It would have been there in the soil. So plants growing in the gold mine region, they'll absorb gold. Plants growing in nearby the radioactive site, because of the leaching of the radioactive minerals, they will absorb the strontium. Likewise, also plants, if they are growing near some industries or mining sites and all that, they will absorb selenium. But in turn, these plants are not essential nutrients, so or elements for the plant. So what are the different essential elements? So what are the criteria mineral elements has to follow if it has to be considered an essential element for the plant? So the selenium, gold and strontium and all that don't come under that criteria. They do not fall into those criteria. So that is why they are the non-essential elements which will not do any help in the growth of the plant. So to understand better what are the essential criteria, so what are the criteria for essentiality of a mineral element, to consider that mineral element as one of the essential components that are needed for the plant, there are some criteria which it has to satisfy. So what are those? We shall see. They must be absolutely necessary for the plants in terms of supporting the normal growth and reproduction of the plant. So if a mineral is absorbed by the plant and that particular mineral does not help in the growth of the plant, not help in the setting of the seeds in the plant and all that, what is the use of absorbing that mineral, right? So any mineral absorbed by the plant is considered essential only if it helps the plant to grow properly and helps the plant to reproduce well. So that is one of the criteria. So the next criteria is the requirement of the element must be specific and it should not be replaceable by another element. Say for example, we add iron. Iron is needed for the plant for some purpose, and that iron should fulfill that particular purpose. It is not that, okay, iron, if it cannot fulfill that particular purpose or growth of the plant, and another substitute mineral can be added to that. So therefore, you cannot consider it as essential. Okay, I can explain it to you in two ways. Say for example, essential elements. So there is a pencil. So you have a pencil and a pen. So a pen is a substitute for a pencil, right? So what happens if your pencil breaks or something happens, you will go in for using the pen. So pencil is not essential there. You cannot consider it as essential because there is a substitute for that, right? So therefore, here pencil means only pencil should be needed. You cannot use a pen instead of a pencil. So you cannot substitute a pen with that of a pencil. If you substitute, you cannot consider the pencil to be essential, right? Likewise, we have AC and fan in the house, right? So if the fan is not working, we can switch on to the AC. If the AC is not working, we can switch on to the fan. So now both are not essential. They are not very essential. Why? Because if one is not there, we can make use of the other. So in such a condition, you cannot call them as essential. Likewise here, the requirement of an element must be specific. Say for example, for fruiting and all to occur, sometimes what happens, if a proper boron and all that is not supplied to the plant, then the fruits, before it reaches the maturity or before ripening itself, it will fall off from the plant. So saying that, okay, the boron is needed for the plant to maintain the fruit until the maturity stage. But if boron is not supplied, and instead of boron, if you can supply another mineral that will provide the substitute for that, then you cannot consider an essential mineral. So therefore, the requirement of the element must be specific and it should not be replaceable by another element. So that is how it is considered one of the criteria for an element or a mineral to be quite essential. And the element must be directly involved in the metabolism of the plant. So there are various biochemical pathways occurring in the plant, and these minerals should directly participate in the biochemical pathway. Say for example, we add nitrogen. Nitrogen is needed for the various biochemical pathways in a plant, right? So we add zinc. So zinc is also one of the main component that is needed for a metabolism mechanism in the plant. So any metabolic activity occurring in the plant, these elements or minerals should directly participate in the metabolic activity of the plant, therefore promoting the proper growth and development of the plant. So only in such cases you can consider these minerals as essential. So if they're not participating in the metabolic activity, then what is the point of the plant taking up these minerals? it is of no use, right? So that is how. So these are some of the criteria for considering a mineral or a element to be essential for the particular plant. So based on the essentiality or based on the above criteria that we followed. So what were the criteria? It should help in the overall growth and development of the plant as well as reproduction of the plant, and for that particular mineral there should not be a substitute, and one more is they should directly participate in the metabolic activity of the plant. So if all these three criteria are fulfilled, so based upon the above criteria, only a few elements have been found. So I told you there are 150 elements. Out of the 150, 60 were identified or discovered, and out of the 60, only those elements which follow the criteria that we learned previously, then only the elements can be considered as essential. So out of those 60, only a few elements have been compulsorily and absolutely essential for the plant growth as well as metabolism in the plant for the overall development of the plant. And these elements, based on the criteria or based on how much they are required for the plant, whether they are required in trace amounts or very little quantity, or whether they are required in large quantity, they are broadly classified into two categories. That is based on the quantitative requirement. That is, they are classified as macronutrients. So macronutrients means, macro means large. So macronutrients means the plants require minerals in a larger quantity. So such elements have been put under macronutrients, and one more is micronutrients, which means these elements are required by the plant in a smaller quantity. So macronutrients and micronutrients. So micronutrients are also called as the trace elements because they are negligible in amount. So that is why they are also called as trace elements. So these are the different types or groups into which the minerals have been classified based on their quantitative requirement as macronutrients and micronutrients. So now we shall see what are the different types of macronutrients and the micronutrients required by the plant. So macronutrients are generally present in plant tissues in larger amounts. So that is in excess, more than 10 millimole per kg of dry matter. So whenever the plant dies and when we take the weight of the dry matter, if the dry matter weighs more than 10 millimole per kg, then whatever elements are present in that, it is considered to be the macronutrients. So the macronutrients include carbon, then we have hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, then sulfur, we have potassium, calcium and magnesium. So of these, carbon and hydrogen are got from the atmosphere. So carbon, hydrogen as well as oxygen are got from the atmosphere. So these are macronutrients. They are required in large quantity because carbon is required for photosynthesis, hydrogen also for photosynthesis, oxygen for respiration in plants. For all that it is required. So from where do they get it? From the atmosphere. But apart from this, there are certain minerals which are got from the soil, which are absorbed by the plant roots from the soil. They are calcium, then we have sulfur, phosphorus, nitrogen, then potassium and magnesium. So all these are taken by the soil, and also we can add it to the soil so that the plants can absorb this. But we can't add carbon dioxide, oxygen and hydrogen because it is absorbed by the plants from the atmosphere itself. So the fertilizers are also prepared based on the different soil minerals that are absorbed by the roots from the soil. So these are the different macronutrients. So next, talking about the micronutrients. So I told you micronutrients are also called as the trace elements. So micronutrients are needed in very small quantities, that is less than 10 millimolar per kg of dry matter of that particular plant. So they are less in needed or negligibly they are needed. So these include iron, then we have manganese, copper, then molybdenum, zinc, boron, chlorine and nickel. So all these are needed by the plants, but they are needed in negligible quantities, or they are needed by the plants in very small quantities. So that is why they are called as the micronutrients or the trace elements. So in addition to the 17 essential elements that have been named above, so what are the different 17 essential elements that we had named? One was carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, calcium, sulfur, phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium, magnesium. Then we had copper, molybdenum, manganese, zinc, iron, then boron, chlorine, nickel. So all these are the different 17 essential elements that are needed. So out of the 150 elements that are there, 60 were discovered. Out of the 60, only 17 are the essential elements based on the criteria which we had studied earlier. So in addition to the 17 elements that have been named above, there are some other beneficial elements also that are needed by the plant, such as sodium, silicon, cobalt and selenium. So selenium also is needed for the plant in some extent. But apart from that, the others, that is the strontium and all, that is not needed for the plant. But selenium, to some extent, it is essential element for the plant, and they are required by the higher plants, that is the higher plants such as the angiosperms. So the angiosperms require sodium, silicon, cobalt as well as the selenium, which are also considered as essential elements along with the 17 essential elements. So 17 essential elements are required by all the plants. But apart from that, these four, that is sodium, silicon, cobalt and selenium, are required by the higher plants, that is the angiosperms. So these are about the different micronutrients and the macronutrients. So now we shall see the micronutrient, the elements are actually classified into or grouped into 4 broad categories on their basis. That is what basis? On the basis of their function. So each element, I told you, they perform different functions, right? So that is one of the criteria for the element. No element will perform the same function. So if they perform the same function, it means that if one element is not there and a substitute is there. So these elements, whichever we studied in the previous slide, they are actually very essential. Why? Because they can perform only specific functions which no other element can use as a substitute for them. So here they are grouped into 4 broad categories on the basis of the different functions that they perform. So they are grouped as essential elements. So what are essential elements? So essential elements that of biomolecules and hence structural elements of cells. So they are grouped as essential elements of biomolecules and the structural elements of the cell. So these are the elements or the minerals that help in the structural formation of a cell. So they are the biomolecules that help in the proper functioning of the cell. Say for example, there is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen. So if the structural function of a cell has to occur properly, then the essential elements that are required are nothing but the biomolecules, which are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen. And also essential elements that are components of energy related chemical compounds in the plant. So we had studied while talking about photosynthesis in plants, respiration in plants, that a lot of energy is needed by the plants. So if the energy has to be produced in the plants, if the various biochemical pathways or metabolic activities has to take place in the plants, then the plants need magnesium, because magnesium is one of the important components of the chlorophyll pigment. So, and also they need phosphorus. So phosphorus, it is the backbone of the DNA, is made up of phosphorus, right? So therefore, all the cells will have their own genetic material in the chromosome, that is the DNA. And if the DNA has to work well, then phosphorus is needed, because phosphorus is the backbone of the DNA. So that is why any energy related function in the plant, if it has to occur, then magnesium should be present in the chlorophyll and phosphorus should be present in the ATP. That is adenosine triphosphate is the energy producer in most of the plants for various metabolic activities to occur. And One more, they are grouped as essential elements that activate or inhibit enzymes. Say for example, so we know that when various biochemical pathways are going on in the plants or metabolic activities such as respiration, photosynthesis and all that, when it is occurring in the plant. So say for example, glycolysis. If glycolysis has to occur properly, then various enzymes should get activated, right? So there are certain essential elements whose main function is to activate these particular enzymes. For example, magnesium. So magnesium is an activator for both ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase enzyme, that is Rubisco. So we had heard about RUBP enzyme, right? So RUBP enzyme is one very important. We know that ribulose biphosphate carboxylase oxygenase and phosphoenol pyruvate carboxylase. All these are required during the process of photosynthesis. These are the critical enzymes in photosynthetic carbon fixation. So if photosynthetic carbon fixation, so if the plants has to absorb carbon from the atmosphere, which is one of the important raw material in the photosynthesis, then these enzymes should get activated. That is ribulose biphosphate carboxylase oxygenase and phosphoenol pyruvate carboxylase. So if these has to get activated, then magnesium is an essential element for that. One more example we can take of is zinc. So zinc is an activator of alcohol. So zinc is an activator of alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme, and likewise there is molybdenum, which is an activator of nitrogenase enzyme during nitrogen metabolism. So molybdenum, it is one of the essential element for nitrogen fixation to occur. So all these are very important. These are the elements which actually help in the activation or inhibition of the enzymes during various metabolic processes in the plant, be it respiration, photosynthesis, nitrogen fixation, etc. And there are some essential elements that can alter the osmotic potential of the plant. Say for example, potassium. So potassium plays a very important role in the opening and closing of stomata. So why is opening and closing of stomata important? Because if the stomata are open, then exchange of gases will take place, transpiration will occur, which is all needed for the plant, right? And if the stomata opening and closing has to occur at proper time, then potassium is one such element which will promote the opening and the closing of stomata at the required moment. For this also, that is, how do they promote the opening and closing of stomata? By maintaining the osmotic potential. So what is osmosis? The movement of molecules from a region of higher concentration to a region of the lower concentration through a permeable or a semi-permeable membrane, right? So here, if this particular osmotic potential has to occur properly, resulting in the opening and the closing of the stomata, then potassium is one of the important essential elements. So therefore, based on their function, the essential elements are classified as biomolecules, as components of energy related chemical compounds, as activators or inhibitors of enzyme, and they're also called as the ones which maintain the osmotic potential of the cell. So these four types are how the essential minerals are categorized based on their different functions. So this was about this particular session wherein we studied about the hydroponics, which actually led to the discovery of various essential elements, and also we understood about the micronutrients and the macronutrients. What are the different criteria that has to be followed if a mineral has to be considered essential, and what are the different categories the minerals are classified into based on their function, all that we studied. In the coming session, we shall discuss about the role of various macronutrients. So what are the different macronutrients and exactly what do these macronutrients do in the plant, we shall study. So we shall meet again in the coming session. Thank you.